Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kelsey Goforth and I'm DWDC's Program Director. Today I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, located in Toronto and covered by Treaty 13. As part of DWDC's adherence to the values of inclusion and people-centeredness, we're committed to working towards recognizing, respecting, and addressing the distinct health needs of Métis, Inuit, First Nations, and Indigenous peoples related to end-of-life and medical assistance in dying. We will continue to work to listen to and amplify the voices of Indigenous communities in the discussion of end-of-life choice. I'm thrilled to welcome you today to our webinar. We are meeting today to recognize National Advanced Care Planning Day, which happens each year on April 16th, so just a few days ago. ACP Day is an opportunity to reflect on our healthcare decisions and wishes. And this year we are incorporating an additional element, the opportunity to interview and engage with the volunteers doing this important work all across Canada. So before I welcome today's presenters, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items with you. We do have everybody muted on the call today. That said, we'd love to hear your questions and comments. How you can do that is by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your message to us and we will read it out at the end for the presenters to address. We do have a lot of folks registered today and I'm hoping that there's lots of great questions coming through as well. If you can keep your questions as clear and concise as possible, then we can get to as many as we can during the Q&A. If you have anything outstanding that we don't get to this afternoon, you're welcome to email us. The email is support@dyingwithdignity.ca. And also, if you have a question that's more personal in nature and you need direct support, again, please email us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca. We're also going to be sending a post-webinar survey that's going to pop up on your screen. If you could take a few minutes to fill that out and let us know what you thought, we'd appreciate that feedback. We're also recording today's session, so it will be available for you later on, and we'll be meeting for about 60 to 75 minutes. Now to welcome today's speakers. It's so important to recognize that all across the country, we have committed and knowledgeable volunteers delivering advanced care planning presentations. And today we are joined by 3 of those volunteers. We have Denyse Burns. She's a volunteer with DWDC's GTA chapter. She is an end-of-life doula professional certificate and an advanced care planning and goals of care and consent certificate, and has also completed hospice palliative care training. Jon Snipper is the Director of Advanced Care Planning at DWDC's Ottawa chapter. He has been involved with DWDC since 2018 and facilitated advanced care planning workshops since 2019. And Dorothy Stephens is an advanced care planning educator and founding member of DWDC's Winnipeg chapter. She has been a member of DWDC since 2014 and has spoken to hundreds of people about advanced care planning at presentations and health and wellness fairs. So we are pleased to have all 3 of you joining us today, and I am going to turn it over to you to get us started with the content this afternoon.
So, hi, Kelsey, it's Denyse, and welcome to everyone today joining us, I think, from across Canada, and excited to have you here. This presentation is broken into 3 parts. My colleagues will be doing the second and the third part. We wanted to just introduce everyone to the components of advanced care planning and what exactly it is. I think what I feel is passionate about advanced care planning and why I feel that is that it's an important thing to think about our healthcare. All of us do a lot of planning, and I know that we plan for large events, plan for weddings, we plan for births, we plan for trips, we plan our retirement, we plan where we might want to live in different times in our life. So planning is a part of what we do naturally. And so why not plan for our health care? And what we're going to talk about today is how to do that. Maybe I'll have you move it through, Kelsey, to the 2 components that what I'll be introducing right now is what is it? A lot of people wonder what advanced care planning is, and what are the steps? So what is it? Is sort of shown in this next slide, is that it really is, it's a document, but it is at the heart of being an empowered patient, taking control of your life and taking control of the decisions around how you want to be treated should you not be able to speak for yourself. And I really emphasize that an advanced care plan is one that outlines your decisions and wishes, and somebody speaks on your behalf if you're not able to speak for yourself. It's important to think about that this is not just end of life planning, but it really is planning for any healthcare situation. So we encourage people at all ages and stages of life to think about this. If you're younger, it could be an accident. We think about, so who would speak for you if you could not speak for yourself? So it really appeals to a wide range of people. The umbrella, we think of it as an umbrella because it is an umbrella of services. I know as we plan our lives, we think about estate planning, we do some financial planning, we do have a lot of health documents, we do have wills. So there are a number of things that we plan, but if we look at the umbrella, we'd like to focus on the values and the beliefs, the things that are important to us around our healthcare. And so view it as maybe it's all encompassing, but today we're going to focus on really your healthcare values. A lot of people are familiar with the power of attorney for finance, that we'll be talking more of a power of attorney for healthcare. Kelsey. And as I say that, I know that many of you are from across Canada. So as you see with this next slide, each province has its own terminology in terms of health and in terms of the document that we're calling an advanced care plan. In Ontario, we do refer to it as wishes. It's if you see here, they do say advanced care directive, but because in Ontario, it's not viewed as a legal document, we use the word wishes. Now, in the other provinces, they use different terminology. So I would urge you, if you're going to complete your advanced care plan, and you can certainly do that by downloading our advanced care planning kit that we have available on our website at DWDC, and there will be specific forms for each province available to you. So we really we have an asterisk around Nunavut as well, because Nunavut has a different system, a sort of a guardian. They don't have a document name. So it's there, and I just want to highlight that each province needs to have its own specific form. So the difference, what's the difference between ACP and wills? Well, it's right here. Wills are great, but they're not accessed until after your death. An ACP is accessed while you are alive. And an ACP should be available, and you should make it available. And Dorothy will be talking more about that. You should be discussing with your family and your physician. And it's a document that you keep on hand at home in your apartment, and you can give to your friends, to your family, I guess, who is involved with it. Creating the plan. This is the overview. Dorothy and Jon will get more granular in the steps, but it's a 4-step process in that the first 2 steps are the critical steps that you really want to spend some time considering your values. And maybe we can move into the next slide, Kelsey, because it really highlights what goes into the process. So the first step is very much thinking about your values, beliefs, and preferences for your future healthcare. So what is it how do you view yourself being taken care of? What do you believe in, whether it's end-of-life care or any healthcare situation that you may be faced with and have to make decisions? How do you want to be treated? How do you want someone to look after you? And that is a very challenging discussion. So we encourage people to spend time there and have those discussions with family and friends. And then the decision, and that's even more critical. Who's going to speak on your behalf? And who would you like that person to be? And we call that the substitute decision maker. And that's important because it's not always a family member that may be that person. And so we will talk again, we will explore the different thoughts about who you should have. And once you have that made that decision and you've considered what your values and beliefs are, then a document is used to, I guess, to highlight what it is that you want and what your preferences are want and your advanced care directive. And also in that document, you can highlight who is your power of attorney for your finances, for your healthcare especially, and finances. You may also document separate healthcare such as a DNR. And maybe you may be thinking of donating, so completing an organ donation. If you have other healthcare documents or healthcare wishes, you would have them in that document. And the fourth step, always review what you plan today, and what you think about today may not be the same a year or two from now. Our health needs change. We face changes all the time, so it's good to review. And we'll see as I wrap up my introduction piece, the next slide will sort of be a summary of, as the Dying with Dignity highlights in their document, in their toolkit. Remember, we talked about the who, and we say everyone. And I think that's really important to really talk about that, having that all adults who have a decision-making capacity, anybody 18 years and over, depending, should be thinking about it. And why? Because I believe that this is a gift that you give to your family. I believe it's a gift because you give them peace of mind. If something should happen, really, if it happens like we saw in COVID, how many people were rushed to the hospital and doctors were asking, what would you want for your family or member? And so once we know and we can easily say what our family member wants, that relieves a lot of burden. And we talked about the what, and we'll talk more about those documents. And when is very critical as well. You want to update it. You may be, say, every year on your birth date, you might go in and update it. It's really important. And you want to be doing it when you have the capacity to do it. And where as well, anywhere, as they say. So certain parts involve a professional. You may talk to an attorney. You may be talking to your doctor. So they may have copies as well. And as I wrap up, I'd like to introduce Dorothy, who will take you through the more in-depth look at planning.
Okay, hi. I'm so excited to be here. So how am I going to approach this and who is involved? So people ask, what should I put in my healthcare directive document? And it's hard to know what to put in it if you haven't done some homework first. So I would suggest a good place to start is to do a realistic assessment of your health status. We all like to think that we are younger and in better health than we really are, but in fact, you can't do an effective advanced directive if you are in denial. In the Dying with Dignity National Toolkit for doing the healthcare directive, starting on page 10, there are a couple of really good health questionnaires that will help you do an honest assessment of your own health. And in addition to that, if you already have any kind of diagnosis of any kind of chronic, long-term, or progressive illness, you should make sure that you have all the information you need about that before you begin. When you prepare to write your document, focus on describing your values and beliefs and priorities, and describing what you would consider an acceptable quality of life for you, rather than just indicating a list of I would or would not want this tube or treatment, because you can't envision every possible health condition that could happen to you. So the best approach is to describe your values and beliefs, and then the people who have to make a decision will be able to use those. Starting on page 15 in the National Advanced Care Planning Toolkit, there are some really good questionnaires in there about your values and beliefs and fears. And it will be really helpful if you fill these out. And what I did is after I completed them, I attached them to my finished document so that people can refer to them later. Who is involved? Make sure that you involve all the people who are relevant, who might need to know your wishes or who might have input or questions. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And last, before you write anything down, make sure that the wishes that you are requesting are clear and understandable and that they're legal and reasonable. In particular, watch for vague wording like, I don't want any heroic measures, because that's not always clear. It can mean different things to different people. So looking at some strategies for approaching your healthcare directive, if you look at that workbook and it's 30 pages, you can be a little bit intimidated. So break it down. Think about your number one priority. If something happened to you tomorrow, what would be the most important message that you would want your family to convey to the doctor providing your care about your beliefs or values or what you would or would not want? If you can answer that, start there and write that down, and then you've made a start. You can always flesh it out later. If you have somebody else that you can work through this process with, like maybe your spouse or your best friend or a family member, then you can bounce ideas off of each other and encourage each other, and that will really help. Break down into a list of tasks that you need to accomplish on the way to completing your directive. So for instance, one of them could be that you're going to complete the values questionnaires, or that you're going to talk to your doctor, or that you're going to choose a substitute decision maker, things like that. And then once you've got your little list, make sure that you give yourself that little pat on the back or a gold star as you work through the list. And then that way you will have a definite goal and be able to get through it. Okay. So one of the most important tasks that you're going to do is you're going to appoint a substitute decision maker, sometimes called proxy or representative or something else, depending on your province. This is the person who is going to make healthcare decisions on your behalf if you are too sick. And a lot of people think that it has to be their next of kin, but it does not need to be your next of kin. In fact, it doesn't have to be a family member at all. You can appoint anybody you want. And there could be some good reasons why your next of kin might not be the best person for you to choose. For example, if your next of kin is your spouse, and if that spouse is elderly or in poor health or showing signs of early dementia, or if your next of kin is an adult child and perhaps you have significantly different opinions to that child on matters of, for instance, religion, politics, vaccine mandates, or alternative medicine, then you might want to reconsider whether or not that person is the best choice to be making healthcare decisions for you. So obviously, the most important thing you want when you're choosing your proxy is you want to find somebody who you can trust implicitly, because this person is expected to carry out your wishes if you have written them down. And if your condition is not covered exactly according to your wishes, then they have to act on their best judgment of what you would want. So in addition to that, consider some other things. Does this person have enough availability and time? Because if something serious happens to you, they could be in it for the long haul, weeks or months or years, meetings, appointments, phone calls. Everything can, of course, be done by Zoom or long distance phone call these days, but it's still easier if the person lives in the same community. Is it somebody who's emotionally capable? Are they able to make difficult decisions or pull the plug if that's what they're required to do or what you're asking? And are they going to be somebody who can stand up and advocate for you in the presence of intimidating doctors in white coats? Is this person comfortable in a hospital setting and not squeamish? Again, consider the health status and age. And also, if you do appoint your spouse as your proxy, think about if you ever were to separate or divorce. In most places that will then become null and you'll have to appoint somebody else. But check for your province. It is a good idea to have more than one proxy because then you want to back up in case the first person cannot decide or is not available or is ill themselves. However, if you appoint more than one person, then you have to decide if it's consecutive, which means the first person makes the decision and the second person is only a backup. Or if you say joint, then you are expecting them to agree. And so then you have to think, well, what if they don't? In Manitoba, where I live, the law says that if they cannot agree, majority rules, or else if there's no majority, the first person gets it. But I'm not sure, you would have to check for each province what that is. And then lastly, there are minimum age requirements for your substitute decision maker, and they are on this slide, but they are also found in that workbook. Basically, it's to be legal age in your province. Okay, and then conversations, really important. Conversations matter. Talk to the most people you can. There are some conversation starters on this slide, and there are more in the toolkit, but some guidelines about who to talk to. Make sure that you talk to your family, regardless of who you intend to appoint as your proxy. If they get upset, remember, it's not about them, it's about you. And if they're not happy and don't agree with your wishes, at least they will be warned and prepared. Their questions and their reactions of people will often help you determine who would, or conversely, who would not make a good proxy for you. And if people know your wishes ahead of time, it will certainly reduce arguments amongst the family later about what care decisions need to be made. And if they have to make tough decisions, it will reduce the amount of guilt that they would feel. Make absolutely sure that you talk to anybody you're intending to appoint as a proxy before you put their name down in the document. It's really not fair to give somebody that responsibility without letting them know, but also you have to make sure that they are willing to take on that responsibility. And then lastly, talk to anybody else in your life whose input you value, or who might have questions that can help you. And that usually includes people like close friends, possibly clergy or church members, people like that. And then one more very important person to talk to is your doctor or other healthcare providers. Doesn't necessarily need to be a doctor or only a doctor. This could be any primary caregiver who knows you well. For example, maybe somebody like your home care case coordinator. Again, there are some conversation starters on the slide. A conversation like this is particularly helpful and even essential if you already have any kind of chronic or progressive illness. And if you think this is going to be a difficult conversation for you, it can be helpful to take a buddy with you to participate in that conversation. Make sure that you ask these people the hard questions about any expected issues or decisions or prognosis if you already have any kind of diagnosis or progressive disease. Ask about benefits, treatments, chance of success related to anything to do with your condition. Ask your doctor about CPR and whether or not, given your age and your health status, this is likely to be a benefit for you or not. In addition, talking to your doctor will enable you to find out if they support your wishes or if maybe it's time to look for another doctor. And then lastly, a healthcare provider who talks to you about your advanced care planning will document that conversation in your medical record. And that can be used to confirm your wishes later on down the road if anything is ever questioned. And that is it for me. And I will pass it off to Jon from, I think you're in Vancouver today, Jon. To do the last section.
I'm on actually a beautiful Gabriola Island. on the west coast, just off Nanaimo. So, and freezing out here, I might add. I don't know what it's like across the rest of the country, but it isn't very warm out here. So I'm talking to you today, and welcome everybody. I gather there's a fairly large number of viewers, and I welcome you all from, I gather, across the country. And I'm delighted to have been asked to do this. So what is included in an advanced directive? And we might as well hit the next slide and we'll see if there's any hints there. No, so I'm going to have to talk a little bit about that, but you've probably pretty much gathered that it's a document, and it should be in document form for a number of reasons, that indicates to the healthcare providers and to your substitute decision maker what treatments you might want or not want administered should an occasion arise when you cannot communicate for yourself. You have to remember that this, as long as you can make your wishes known, what medical treatment or non-treatment you want, this has no relevance. This is only relevant when you can't communicate. And I'm using communicate in the broadest expression. If you can communicate, you can't speak, but you can write, or there's some other method you may have of communicating that somebody understands, knows what you're communicating, then that's fine. This has no application. If, on the other hand, you can't communicate, and that can be temporary, you may have fallen into a coma for some reason, been in an accident, but you're expected to survive. This document can speak for the period that, once again, you can't communicate for yourself. So it's not only end of life, it is also during your life when misfortune occurs and you can't communicate for yourself. But it should be in writing, your wishes, what you want or don't want. It makes obvious sense that it be in writing, particularly if someone is going to be communicating for you. You've appointed a proxy, a substitute decision maker, whatever the relevant wording is, depending on the province you're in. That person may be a friend who may be as old as you are, or perhaps a little younger. Most of you probably, if you're my age anyways, probably may not remember the conversation that you had 3 or 4 years ago, never mind 3 or 4 days ago. So that if it's in writing, then you have a document to turn to rather than trying in an emergency when things are difficult enough and you've got somebody for whom you are the substitute decision maker is in distress and you have to make some decisions for him or her. It's not going to be easy trying to recall that conversation you had 3 years ago and what's the decision here. Whereas if you have a piece of paper that has fairly clearly expressed what that person's wishes, beliefs, etc. are, then you can make your decision with some self-assurance you're doing the right thing. You're acting in the patient's best interest. So that's one very good reason to put it in writing, I would think. In terms of the contents, particular contents of it, as opposed to the form of the document, that's been talked about, wishes and beliefs. I can't remember, I once heard a doctor talking about how many illnesses the body can suffer from, how many thousands there were. So trying to pin down that I may get this, therefore I want this treatment or don't want this treatment is impossible. I tend to encourage people to think of the results of the illness and the treatment. Focus on the results. What is it? What are the medical results that you would like to see happen that would encourage you to get treatment, as opposed to results that would leave you in a state where you don't want treatment? So that's one way of looking at it, and identifying, certainly if you have an illness that you're aware of, that you know about and being treated for, then you can deal with that specifically, of course, in terms of treatments or non-treatments. But it is, do remember, we're talking here about it's not just treatments you want, it's also what you don't want. If you do not want, heroic measures are no help at all to anybody in this day and age particularly. You're talking about you don't want any there's DNR, do not resuscitate, for instance, separate documents for that, but you don't want, all you want is palliative care, for instance, in certain circumstances. You don't want to be fed, you don't want to receive any liquids, you may just want pain medication. That's the kind of thing. But as has been previously stated, if your substitute decision makers knows what your value system is, what is it about your life that you've really appreciated, and they're better able to act in your best interest, which is what they're trying to do. So when it's used, I've indicated it's used when you can't communicate it. You can't communicate it. Who uses it? First and foremost, if you have a substitute decision maker, the substitute decision maker will be using it to communicate on your behalf. That's the first level. The second level is, of course, the medical profession, the healthcare providers that will be providing your healthcare. So that's generally who uses it. It will also be used perhaps by family members and others to understand what it is you want. They are not going to be giving instructions. They may not, if they're not appointed, then they will be speaking or thinking on your behalf and helping perhaps the substitute decision maker make a decision. So that's who uses it. Do I need one? Well, of course, we wouldn't be doing all this if we didn't think you do need one. Technically, you of course don't need one. This is a fairly recent development, and medical help was being given for centuries without these documents. So you don't technically need one, but obviously you should have one. It's like you don't technically need a will after you die to have your estate looked after. Well, this is the same, but everyone knows that it's much wiser to have a will than to not have one. We can go on to the next slide. I'm going to go into a little more depth here. You can see that there's different terminologies, but there's also different requirements to make, as far as I'm aware, the advanced directive effective. It is, I know about Ontario in particular, because that's where I'm from. I was a lawyer in my former life, so I've read the legislation there, but not so much anywhere else. But it is an enforceable document if there's discussion about something and there's a disagreement. If it's clear what your wishes, as we say in Ontario, your advanced directive states, then that has to be followed by your healthcare provider, by your substitute decision maker and your healthcare provider. If it's not clear in Ontario in any event, the substitute decision maker has to act in what he or she thinks is your best interests. But it's Ontario alone that doesn't seem to require any special form. There's no special form, so you can make it any way you want it, nor are there any witnesses required. But for instance, in Alberta, you require a witness. And if you can't sign, someone has to sign on your behalf, then that has to follow the same format. You have to witness the signing on your behalf, and there has to be a completely separate witness. And the witness can never also be the substitute decision maker. That applies throughout all the provinces. In BC, there's 2 witnesses required. In Manitoba, there's no witnesses. In New Brunswick, there's no witnesses. In Newfoundland and Labrador, 2 witnesses are required. In Northwest Territories, 1 witness. In Nova Scotia, 1 witness. In Nunavut, no witnesses. In Ontario, there is, as I say, no form, so there's no witnesses. In PEI, strangely enough, if you have the formal document, then the proxy, your substitute decision maker has to sign it as well. But if you don't have a proxy, then you need to have someone witness. In Quebec, interestingly, in Quebec, there's a actual government prescribed form that you need to get from the government for it to be effective. And they will send you a form with your name and your social, your health number and you have to have 2 witnesses, and then you send it back to them. That's the only province that I'm aware that does that. Alberta, I should have mentioned, actually has a register that you can send your personal directive, as it's there called, to, and then it will be an official in the official government bureaucracy someplace to be handy. That's the only province I'm aware of that has that provision. In Saskatchewan, no witnesses are required. In Yukon, there's 2 witnesses required. So wherever you're listening from today, you'll see that you'll have to go on to the excellent, absolutely superb website that Dying with Dignity Canada has about all this, and get the actual particulars. So it's fairly clear about all of this kind of information. So we can go on to the next slide, I think. Now, this values and beliefs checklist, I think perhaps Denyse referred to it. It's really excellent. When I'm doing my presentation, I actually have one other column, and it's probably the most difficult one, but perhaps the most useful, and it's actually ranking all of these various fears that you have as to which are the things you most fear and the things you least fear. And you can see there's all kinds of different aspects. One thing that this raises and becomes important to discuss with if you become if you're not mentally competent and are having physical problems as well, and it illustrates something interesting. One of the items here is being a burden on loved ones. And it's important if that's something that you're afraid of, and many people in the seminars workshops we've conducted have talked about this as being something that they're really fearful of, being a burden on those around them. It's important to actually probably talk to those for whom you may be a burden. You may be surprised to learn that it's a burden that they will be happy to carry. And anyone who's had that happen in his or her life has probably found that the burden, while it may have been heavy, was one that really gave some value, added value to their lives, and was something that they were happy to be able to do. And when you're looking at all these things and thinking about them, that's why it's important to be talking to people around you, because you may be surprised. You think being incontinent, well, this is embarrassing, it may be, but people around you may say, no, it doesn't matter. So this is a very difficult thing for most people to do, but it's a really important thing to do. And in our workshop, where we have these small group discussions, these charts have been invaluable. People have indicated to us in coming to grips with making an advanced directive. Can we go to the next slide? Here's once again how important the following are to you. And once again, I've added a column trying to rank all these things that are important. And there's a good number of them, and it's worthwhile going through them. And you're thinking of it in terms of what will a medical intervention or non-intervention, what effect will it have on, for instance, my independence, autonomy, and control? If for instance, if you had COVID in the early days and had to go on a ventilator, there was a lot of information about ventilators and how destructive they could be in terms of your mental alertness and competence when you got off the ventilator. And so that's the kind of thing you may think about in terms of, well, do I want that kind of treatment? Do I want to be put on a ventilator in these circumstances if I would become mentally incompetent as a result of being on a ventilator? So that's what I'm talking about, thinking about the results of the treatment and enumerating more or less the results you can live with. And that's why in those circumstances, you can live with the results. So you would want treatment if the results were no worse than leaving you in this or that estate. And treatments you don't want if they will leave you in a certain state. And that's what this rating scale helps you with decide in terms of what treatments you might or might not want. We can go to the next slide. So yes, definitely go to the DWD website, find out about the forms, find out what the legal requirements are for the form to be effective. There's the whole issue of making copies. We suggest that make copies and then sign the copies and have the witnesses sign the copies. And so that whoever you're giving these to, and that would be, of course, your substitute decision maker, people who will be gathered around you in times of distress where you can't communicate, which are likely family members or even close friends, you may want to have a copy. It's all personal to you, but certainly the substitute decision maker and any healthcare professional you think will be involved in your care in these circumstances should also have one of these. Reviewing them, it's a good idea. If you're going to change them and there's a requirement for witnesses for it to be enforceable, then of course you may have to redo the entire document. One thing I will mention is we certainly say don't include this document with the document appointing your substitute decision maker, because those are always and all have defined legal requirements and are like a will or anything else. And if you violate the requirements, the document becomes ineffective. Because of the nature of this document, I would certainly recommend that you keep it completely separate from the document appointing the person who is going to be your substitute decision maker. I didn't mention before, but I will mention that you can put in this document, although it's not enforceable, anything you may want to say about medical assistance in dying. There's no reason you can't state in the document the circumstances in which you might want medical assistance in dying. You cannot, of course, it's not enforceable, but there may be certain circumstances in upcoming legislation within the next while that will permit what's called an advanced consent, not an advanced directive, an advanced consent to medical assistance in dying, in probably will be fairly limited circumstances. But if medical assistance in dying is something that you would want in certain circumstances, then we suggest you include something for that. Changes you've made, they've indicated, people should be told if you change the document. And of course, lastly, keep it in a place where it can be easily found. And your cell phone, if you have a cell phone, you may indicate in your cell phone. There is a special provision in your cell phone for this kind of thing where it can go. Next slide. This is the advanced directive form. I'm not going to go through everybody's is different in each province, although there's some similarities. It's important to read it over very carefully, particularly in what you don't want, distinguishing what you want from what you don't want. Next slide. And that's more of the same. Again, read it very carefully. And next slide. Well, that's it. So that's all. I tried to summarize as quickly as I can. That's it from me for the time being.
Thank you, Jon, Dorothy, and Denyse for all of your information. This has been really great, and I think people are walking away with some great information about advanced care planning. We're going to switch gears a little bit. As mentioned earlier in the session, we're so grateful to have volunteers across the country leading advanced care planning presentations in their communities, and we thought it would be great to hear from those presenters, and as mentioned, we have 3 of them with us today, to learn a little bit more about what those experiences have been like. So I'm wondering, why is delivering advanced care planning presentations important to you, and what led you to get involved in this area of education? Maybe Jon, you could get us started with that.
I guess I got involved when I went to a panel discussion on which there was the chapter chair and vice chair of the Ottawa chapter. I was really impressed with the contribution they made to the panel. It may have been about medical assistance in dying. I can't recall. It was a number of years ago. This gets back to what I was saying about putting your advance directive in writing. You have someone like me as your substitute decision maker. And that's what got me involved. I was a lawyer. I these days call myself a recovering lawyer. Once a lawyer, always a lawyer, though. And so I was interested because of the legal aspect of this appointment of substitute decision maker and the advanced care directive. So that seemed to be a natural fit. The person who had been doing it for a few years and was ready to pass the torch on to somebody else. And somehow or other, I managed to pass muster, and that's how I got involved in doing this kind of work.
Thanks, John. Dorothy?
Same question. So for my reason, sadly, it's because I have had plenty of both personal and professional experience in seeing the kind of situations that arise when people do not have any kind of health care directive and families are not aware of what their loved one might want. I've seen, unfortunately, way too many arguments and accusations over treatment decisions. For instance, you hear one child saying, you're going to let dad die because you won't agree to treatment, and another one yelling, saying, mom has no quality of life because you won't agree to let her go. And that's very unfortunate. I've seen aggressive life-prolonging treatment continue to the point of futility. And I've seen families torn apart by stress, conflict, and guilt over decisions when they should, in fact, be supporting each other and their loved one. And so as a result of witnessing that, I've developed some fairly firm ideas about what I would or would not want. And I know a lot of other people have ideas too, but they don't always know how to write them down clearly for others. And so I just felt called to help with that.
Thanks, Dorothy. Denyse?
I think I really have been always thought about it for many years about advanced care planning, because I have really had some strong points of view about, for me, it was like end of life, but I also had experience as a mother, a situation with my son having this very serious accident, and he was not able to speak for himself. And so as his parents at that time, we needed to make some decisions. And even though he was a young man of only 19, the decisions that we made, we knew that would be a benefit to him, and it was something that he would have desired as well. It would have been one of his wishes. So that's probably when it all started for me. And also then as I came through over the years, I became more involved in terms of my own life cycle. And then I became a certified end-of-life doula. And so I'm working with people in terms of quality of life and quality of death. So it's been an ongoing, and I feel that everybody should really have the discussion.
Thanks, Denyse. So the next question is about your experience presenting advanced care planning workshops and how that's affected your own life, if at all. Denyse, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Well, I think what it's done or made me aware of, first of all, is that how many people don't think of it, especially in terms of healthcare. They think about wills and powers of attorney for finances. They think about insurance, but they never really think about their own health. And I think, unfortunately, we never think about, we don't want to think about that because it's not always something positive to think about. But I think for me, what I realized is that people hadn't really thought about it, and they hadn't really thought about it in terms of also the age. It's not just for people who are facing a terminal illness or end of life. It's for everyone. And so I think I'm always surprised at people being surprised that we can do this and write it down, even though in Ontario it's not a legal document, but it is our wishes and it has to be followed.
And Jon? Oh, you're muted, Jon.
Sorry. I professionally, of course, I made hundreds and hundreds of wills over the course of my practice, as well as what we used to call living wills, which were the heroic measures variety. And I had no real knowledge. Only after I retired did I realize what was really required to give proper professional help was the kind of thing that the advanced care plan requires. And I know that there are people that lawyers making wills, et cetera, that may not be fully aware of this kind of provision. So I learned about it, and then I had two occasions in my life where I was became a substitute decision maker, in which I was glad that I knew that this existed. One required and it was an end of life decision, and this person was in a nursing home, and the attendants, kind people that they were, even though she was in a coma and I knew did not want to live any longer, she was 92, they were giving her life support system. So I had to indicate to them that who I was, and that I could instruct them that they were to remove the life support system because I knew she didn't want it. And then recently I had something much closer to home, in which a family member went into a coma. And because I knew about all this stuff, she had actually had a lawyer do a substitute decision maker document, a power of attorney for personal care. And neither person lived in Ottawa. One of them didn't even know that she had been appointed in that position. And the other one knew, but was the other end of the country. So and she had her own problems and really didn't, she wanted to be involved in any decision makings while my sister was in a coma. But I said, that's fine, I certainly will involve you. But so both of them actually withdrew as the substitute decision maker, and I was in the position because there's a hierarchy in Ontario of people when there is no substitute decision maker, and I was the lead in that hierarchy in the circumstances. So I became the substitute decision maker, and it was interesting because it reminded me that these documents are not just for end of life. Happily, my sister recovered from her coma, and there was no significant decisions that I had to make. And I had not had any conversations because I was a substitute decision maker. And in fact, neither of the ones she appointed had any real meaningful conversations with her about what her wishes were in these very difficult circumstances. So it really brought home to me, and I hope for your listeners, my personal experience, how important this discussion is about beliefs, wishes, results, kinds of medical treatment. It brought home to me in spades how that is such an important step in this very important part of somebody's proper documentation under that umbrella.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that about your personal experiences with us, Jon. That's really helpful, I think, for everyone to see how, this has affected you and what you've gone through recently as well. Denyse, I think you mentioned in your last answer how it's quite, surprising when you're doing presentations, how people maybe come to realize that they can put a lot of these wishes in their documents, and that they are able to sort of speak to what they want or don't want. When delivering presentations, what other feedback have you been receiving from attendees? And maybe Dorothy can get us started with that answer.
I've been doing these presentations for several years, and I would say that the feedback from the live presentations is overwhelmingly positive. Most common comments are, it's a real wake-up call or a real eye-opener. Those are terms that people use. I also get a lot of people saying that the amount of information is kind of overwhelming. And I've even had a few people who have attended more than one presentation because they get it the second time. I've had quite a few people who say that they thought that they knew enough, but now they realize they didn't. And a number of people who indicated at the start that they already had a healthcare directive, but by the end of the presentation, they realized that what they had is not adequate and they're going to redo it. And most commonly, what they're talking about is whatever they had was very basic, and now they're going to do the Dying with Dignity version, which of course is much more detailed. And then the other thing is that a lot of people say that having the live presentations with the opportunity for questions really helps, because there's always so much that needs to be clarified.
Thanks, Dorothy. And Jon?
Yeah, I actually do at the end of our presentation, I send out an evaluation form, and like Dorothy, people have generally, or in fact, in almost every case, have really appreciated the information they've received, actually enjoyed. It's a 2.5-hour slog for everybody, but they've really appreciated it. And I would just put in a pitch for everyone who's listening today. This is just a general overview. It's really important that you bear down on your own individual province requirements and go to the Dying with Dignity website and look at that. What was really been interesting is that people often find the most valuable part has been the use of the breakout rooms, and we've been doing that with Zoom. I've forgotten what it was like to do an in-person presentation. It's been some while. We're hoping to get back to them because we really enjoy it. But it's really important to go on the website. Then on top of that, go and attend, if available, watch for a presentation of an ACP workshop in your particular territory or province, because you'll get a lot more useful information. And the breakout rooms, if they're provided, I know we do that, that's usually been the most informative and interesting for our attendees. And it's surprising how much personal sharing with complete strangers goes on when they start discussing individual, their individual, why they're there. And occasionally we get people with their substitute decision makers as well.
Thanks, Jon. That goes back to the whole buddy system strategy we talked about, having people all together and able to work through everything as a group. That's great. And Denyse?
Well, I think just to build on what Jon and Dorothy were saying, as they do it in group, I also do a lot of one-on-ones because of the sensitivity of the discussions, when people will say, I really want to talk about this, and especially around the wishes and the beliefs. Not everybody is comfortable chatting maybe with their family members with it. So sometimes we have a bit of an opportunity to talk about it. And it kind of paves the way. It makes for an easy landing when you want to talk to your relatives and your family about it. So I think that is probably what I would say to someone if they're having, definitely try to get into a small group dynamic, small group workshop or breakout rooms where they can share their feelings or their thoughts, and maybe speak to people with one-on-one. We do a little bit of that here in our chapter. We do some small group work, and so I encourage everyone to reach out and try to have those discussions.
Great, thank you. So we are going to move into some audience questions shortly. So if you do have any outstanding questions, please take the time to type them in, and we'll try to get to some shortly. One more question for our presenters in this part of the segment today. Is there one thing that you would like people to walk away with from the session this afternoon? If there's just one takeaway from anything that you've talked about today, what would that be? Dorothy, do you want to get us started?
Sure. If you do nothing else, make sure that you talk about it. lots of people don't know where to begin, and talking about it is probably the most helpful thing you can do. Like Jon mentioned, in his own family, there were people who didn't know because nobody had talked about it. The thing about talking to people is that you get feedback, and the more people you talk to, the easier it will get to know how to proceed, because you use that feedback to make some decisions for yourself. You might think you don't know what you want, but when you talk to somebody else and you hear them say something that you disagree with, then all of a sudden you know what you want. And talking about it makes your family and your friends aware of your wishes, and it will give you some feedback that will help you get started and know what to put. And then once you know what to put, the writing is easy. The hard part is figuring out what to write. And the more you talk about it, the easier it will get.
Thanks, Dorothy.
I would add to that. Please go to our website and download our toolkit. It's a very, I think, robust toolkit. It asks some great questions. It really helps you to think about what really is important to you. And the second thing is, if you're choosing a decision maker, please have that discussion with them. Do not appoint somebody a decision maker and then don't tell them, because that's a very challenging role. And if you have two decision makers, I always emphasize this, is that have both of them on the same page, so that they both know that these are your wishes and values and beliefs. So that one person says, well, no, so-and-so said this or mother said that. So those are the two sort of cautions and that I really say to people, that it's very important to have. And make sure that it's your document is available. Have it somewhere where people can find it. Post a note on your fridge in case somebody has to come in and you live alone. And we do have all of that support documentation on our website, that you can have a form that you can put on your fridge, or little wallet cards that says, in case of an accident and I can't speak for myself, contact my substitute decision maker. So I really encourage people to really get in there and get curious.
Thanks, Denyse. And Jon? Oh, you're muted, Jon.
The only way you won't hear me. I just digress. I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Denyse said about, certainly about having more than one substitute decision maker. And I know in our presentation, I discourage people from having more than one. I encourage them to have one. And if there's someone you want that decision maker to consult with, then put that right in the document, that before any decision has to be made, where there's time to consult with that person. But there's a number of reasons why, and you'll have to attend my presentation to find out why. I'll leave a little mystery there, why there should only be one, but you can have an alternate if the first one doesn't work. In terms of the actual question, I think the ground has already been covered as to the takeaway. Go to the website, start working on it, and use the website. It's the best tool I think there is available to do the documents and the thinking that has to be done.
Thanks, Jon. And Melissa popped the link in the chat there to the advanced care planning resources on our website, so do check that out. We are going to take about 10 minutes for audience questions. And as mentioned, if there's something outstanding that we don't get to today, please email us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca and we will follow up with you individually. So Jon, maybe you can take this question. Somebody is asking if I need to run all of my documentation by a lawyer, get it signed by a lawyer. What is the role for lawyers in advanced care planning?
Well, there is a role for people who aren't comfortable doing this themselves, following the legal requirements where such legal requirements exist. There are legal requirements, I think, in every province for the appointment of the substitute decision maker, but they're fairly simple. I think what you would realize going to the site is that there's no there's usually, except in Quebec itself, I don't think there's any actual required form. There may be for the substitute decision maker. I doubt that there is for the advanced directive, but there are requirements, as I've highlighted, in certain provinces for witnesses. So going to a lawyer isn't necessary for the document to become what I would call as an enforceable document, a usable document. But it's an insurance policy, I guess, and there's no reason why you're making a will. This would be sort of the normal thing that someone might go after they've made all their decisions and know what they want. They might go to a lawyer to amend their will if they have one and to prepare this document. But if you go to a lawyer, find a lawyer who knows what you're talking about. My suspicion is there are many, many lawyers who are making wills and know nothing about advanced care planning. I don't know that they're taught any in their legal profession. They're taught this, so it's important to check that out in terms of using a lawyer. So it's an insurance policy that I would hope gets done right, but have someone who knows that, a lawyer who knows about it.
Thanks, John. So the next question is more about navigating relationships. So we mentioned earlier on that, you know, lots of people will choose their spouse or their child, or their spouse or their child might be the next ones in the hierarchy that exists in many parts of the country. But say somebody's deciding, I don't want my spouse or my child because they might be too emotional, they might not be able to express the things that I want them to express. Denyse, I'm wondering if you could walk us through any tips you might have about how to approach those conversations. How do I tell my spouse, actually, I want my friend to be my substitute decision maker for whatever the reasons are?
That's an excellent question, and you're absolutely right. Those are challenging situations. I can share one example where a couple were struggling with that, and then the spouse finally said, we were talking about it, and sort of we were having sort of, I guess, a one-on-one counseling session. The spouse said, I really don't think I should be your substitute decision maker, because I don't think that I would be emotionally able to make those decisions. Because once you start having the conversation, and when we talk about someone, I think we go back to thinking about it's someone you trust, someone you feel comfortable will speak for you on your behalf, execute on your behalf. So sometimes that's not always the spouse or the person closest to you. And some people are very clear. I've worked with people that say, I don't want a family member. And they really, because they think about what it is that family member may or may not have to do, depending on what your wishes are. So that particular part of the conversation is definitely one that is sensitive, but it should be really looked at. And maybe by just asking the person, would you want that role? And here's what that role would mean, would, I think, help them to probably walk through that. And there are some people, even if it's our children or our family members, I guess, that they don't want that role. They would prefer not to have that role. So I think it's a good discussion to have, and just sort of maybe say, would that be a role? And I think we have to let them know what that role really is. And as John mentioned, there are a number of things that he had to do. So that's what I would sort of have.
Could I just add what I said to that there's no reason why the spouse can't have a role to perform, even recognized in the document itself, so that you appoint a close friend and give apologies in the document to your spouse, but say, however, where circumstances permit, I want my substitute decision maker to consult with my spouse.
Great, thank you, Denyse and John. The next question, Dorothy, maybe you can take this one. So we had some discussion about we can't plan for every single scenario. We can't think of every single medical thing that might come up. We're thinking about values and beliefs and wishes and that sort of thing. This person is wondering if it's a good idea to specify particular stages of a condition in their documentation. So if I'm at stage 7 of 8 stages of, whatever the illness that they have is, I would want this. If I'm only at stage 2, I would want this. Is that something that we can use to gauge? Is it good to do that, or is it better to maybe just update your documentation every maybe year at that point if things are progressing rather quickly? Oh, you're muted, Dorothy.
Okay, the problem with relying on updating it is that you have to be well enough to update it, and at some point you might get to the point where you can't. I think it's an excellent idea to describe what you consider an acceptable quality of life for you, and to just, your values and beliefs about your quality of life. That's the most important thing. So when you work through those value scales and you consider, what things like being in pain or being incontinent or being immobile or things like that, if you have a diagnosis or even something in the family that you're concerned about, for instance, in my family, it's Alzheimer's. My mother passed away from Alzheimer's, and I have a fair bit of experience with that. And if you read about that disease or condition, often you will find a description of stages of what people might experience as that illness progresses. You might get similar descriptions for other diseases like Parkinson's or MS or something like that. And so if you read the descriptions, like for instance, the Alzheimer's Society of Canada has a description of the various stages of Alzheimer's, and they break it down into, I can't remember if it's 5 or 7 stages. And there's a description of the level of disability with each stage. So it makes it easier to describe objectively, to read it and say, okay, when I get to stage, like say 4, I would not want any more active treatment, or just describe something that's meaningful to you. For instance, if I develop Alzheimer's, when I get to the point where I can no longer live independently, or where I can no longer manage my own affairs, or where I can no longer recognize my children, something like that. Or when I get to stage 5, at that point, I would not want any more active or aggressive treatment. I would wish comfort care only, blah, blah, blah. That is much more useful to your family and your caregivers and your proxy, because it gives them something they can actually measure, so that they will know that that's where you draw the line, as opposed to just saying, if I develop dementia, or I don't want heroic measures, which are really vague. And then people don't know exactly where that cutoff is.
And if I could add, the epidemic has unfortunately revealed in some places the sorry state of our nursing homes. And one of the things you may think about these days is one of the stages which you no longer want treatment is a stage that will leave you in a nursing home. It depends where you live and what your financial circumstances, but from what we know now, it may be that life isn't worth living if you're in one of these horrible nursing homes that have unfortunately been revealed as a result of the epidemic.
Thanks, everybody. So it is 4:15 Eastern time. So I think we will wrap it up here. I want to thank Dorothy, Jon, and Denyse for presenting with us today. And as mentioned, all 3 of our presenters, as well as many others across the country, are delivering advanced care planning sessions online and in person when it's safe to do so. So do keep checking our website. And if there's something in your community, you'll be able to find the information there and sign up for those sessions as well. So I want to thank all 3 of you for everything this afternoon. It's been wonderful to have you, and thank all of our attendees for joining today. We do have 2 sessions coming up next week. So again, please head to the website. There's the links to register for next week. That's on Tuesday and Thursday. And we hope to see you there. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. And thanks again for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.